My name's Amanda. My pronouns are she, her, or they, them. I'm a staff attorney at Root and Rebound. So first, I'll provide background on Root and Rebound. Our mission is to support people who are navigating reentry and reduce the harms perpetuated by mass incarceration. We are a legal services organization, but we're not only lawyers, we're also advocates and activists, many of whom are system impacted. We focus on reentry barriers that many people face due to a criminal record, like housing, employment, family reunification, record cleaning, obtaining state ID and other vital documents, and parole and probation issues, and other things like that. So the agenda for tonight is as follows. I'll provide an overview of fair chance hiring laws, state and county, and then John will provide practical tips and lived experience, and we'll discuss next steps, and then there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. But as Philip mentioned, you can ask questions in the Q&A. For questions in the Q&A, please try to make them more general questions rather than asking for specific legal advice. I can't give individual legal advice as part of this webinar. So in addition to the State Fair Chance Act, the City of LA and the unincorporated areas of the County of LA have additional fair chance ordinances that provide additional protections on top of the State Fair Chance Act. Throughout the presentation, I'll focus on the State Fair Chance Act as the baseline and add additional information when the city or county ordinances add extra protections. The State Fair Chance Act went into effect on January 1st, 2018. It's referred to as ban the box. You might have heard that before. It was designed to protect people with criminal records from discrimination in the hiring process. It's enforced by the California Civil Rights Department, which used to be called the Department of Fair Employment and Housing. It guides when and how employers are allowed to consider an applicant's conviction history. So that's during the job application and hiring process. It applies to most employers that employ 5 or more people. It's 6 years old. The county version went into effect only last year. And so a lot of the information provided tonight will help you recognize violations during the application, hiring, promotion processes. So you can hopefully assert your rights or reach out to a legal services organization like Root and Rebound when you recognize a violation. And then you can file complaints, which is something that I'll discuss at the end of the presentation. The county ordinance went into effect, like I mentioned, last year in September. It's enforced by the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. The LA City ordinance went into effect in 2017 in January. And unlike the county and the state, it applies to employers with 10 or more employees. And it is enforced by the LA Office of Wage Standards. Now I'll discuss the substance of these acts and ordinances. When can an employer consider your criminal record? They cannot ask about or consider an applicant's criminal record before they make a conditional offer of employment. A conditional offer is when you're offered the job contingent on or conditional on passing a background check. So you've gotten the job, but they need to run your background check first. There can be no blanket bans based on conviction history, and employers can't ask on an application or during an interview anything about conviction history. Applicants vary from state to county to city. They have different definitions of who counts as an applicant. So under the State Fair Chance Act, applicant includes people who have already started working by the time the employer receives a background check report. It includes existing employees who have applied or indicated a desire to be considered for another position, so applied for a promotion, for example. It applies to existing employees who are subject to a background investigation due to the employer's new ownership, management, policy, or practice. So if you've been working somewhere for years, your background has never been an issue, and then suddenly they decide, oh, we're going to background check everyone. That's a new policy or practice, so you would count as an applicant under the State Fair Chance Act. Under the County Fair Chance Ordinance, applicant means an individual who submits an application or other document for employment with an employer. This includes an employee who's applying for a promotion with their current employer, like the state, and it includes vocational or educational training with or without pay. It also includes contractors and freelancers. Although I want to note that Uber and Lyft and those kinds of rideshare companies are not included in this. They are required to background check under federal law. And then the most narrow definition of applicants is the city ordinance, which defines an applicant as someone who submits an application or other documentation for employment. It includes vocational or educational training with or without pay, but it wouldn't include someone applying for a promotion. It doesn't include contractors. So you can see the state, county, and city have different definitions of who is an applicant, so that affects who is able to file a complaint under these different laws. Here's something new with the County Fair Chance Ordinance. If the employer is required by law to run a background check, the job posting has to cite the specific law that requires them to run the background check. Otherwise, if they just intend to run a background check, there are requirements that they have to follow. They need to provide a statement that the conditional offer is contingent on conviction history. They need to also provide a statement showing good cause, that's a legal term, but it's justification for inquiring into the conviction history. Running a background check is not a given. The statement can't just say safety concerns. It has to be more specific than that. They have to list all of the They have to list all of the job duties to the specific position, so applicants can be on notice about whether their conviction history might be related to it. And they have to list all the information that they're going to check. So if they're going to check education records, employment history, DMV records, credit history, they need to list all of that. Employers can't see all conviction information. There are certain information that they're not allowed to ever see, which are arrests that did not result in any conviction unless it's an open case currently pending. Any case for which you did a diversion program successfully, that's pre or post-trial diversion. Any marijuana-related convictions that are more than 2 years old. Arrests or convictions that have been sealed, dismissed, expunged, erased by statute, pardoned, or for which you've gotten a certificate of rehabilitation, and any juvenile adjudications. In addition to the Fair Chance Act, the County Fair Chance Act states that employers can't consider any convictions that are more than 7 years old from the date of the conviction. So under state consumer reporting laws, there already exists a 7-year look-back rule that states that commercial background checks can't include convictions that are more than 7 years old from the date of disposition, release, or parole. Many background check companies use the date of disposition, that's the date of conviction, but they're allowed to report a conviction that's, for example, 25 years old if you were released from prison within the past 7 years. So unlike the state Fair Chance Act, the County Fair Chance Ordinance explicitly limits this 7-year look-back rule to the date of the conviction. This is an overview of the fair chance process, so I'll discuss each stage in turn. First is an individual evaluation. The employer has to look at you as an individual. They have to consider the nature and seriousness of your convictions, how much time has passed since those convictions, and the specific duties of the job to see whether your convictions are directly and negatively related to that specific job. So in order to withdraw a job offer based on conviction history, the employer has to determine that the nature of a specific conviction is directly and negatively related to the nature of some of the specific job duties of the job that you're applying to. This is after they've run a background check. If they have concerns about your conviction history, they do the individual evaluation. The second step, if they do make that decision after they've conducted the individualized assessment that they want to withdraw their offer, it has to be based on their preliminary decision that the conviction history, like I said, is directly and adversely related to the duties of the job. If that's the case, they have to provide you notice of their intent to withdraw their offer of employment, which is called a pre-adverse action notice. This notice has to be in writing. It has to specify which convictions the employer relied upon in making their decision to withdraw the offer. They have to provide a copy of the background check that they considered when doing their individualized assessment. They have to give you information on your right to respond within 5 business days. And so your right to respond can include providing evidence of rehabilitation and also information to explain the circumstances of the offense, which is referred to as mitigation information. If there are errors in the background check, then you get an additional 5 days to respond. So that's 10 days total. Unfortunately, under the Fair Chance Act, the State Fair Chance Act, employers aren't required to give you an explanation of this decision. They just need to provide the conviction that was the basis for their decision. But it's not the final decision. In addition to the State Fair Chance Act requirements, the city and county ordinances require employers to put their individualized assessments in writing. So under the city and county ordinances, this pre-adverse action notice must state the conviction, provide a copy of the background check, explain your right to respond. So those are all the same things. And it also has to include their written assessment, which explains how your record, your specific conviction is directly and negatively related to the duties of the job. For the county, that assessment has to be provided by email and mail. And another new part of the county ordinance is that a delay in getting your background check generally can't be the basis for denying you a job unless 10 business days have gone by since the request was made and it causes undue burden. It's unclear how that's going to work in practice, but it is an acknowledgement of what we've seen happening now, where employers just withdraw a job offer because they haven't gotten the background check yet after a couple weeks have gone by. Step 3, your opportunity to respond. So you have at least 5 business days to respond. It's possible that an employer will give you more than that, but under the law, it's 5 business days. And you can provide evidence of, and if there are background check errors, then the employer has to give you 5 additional days. Your response can include proof of rehabilitation and positive aspects of your current life, job qualifications, support systems, vocational trainings, and also you can provide information that places your conviction in a less negative light. And I'll go more in detail in the next slide. But under the county ordinance, your response can be written, it can be provided in person or over the phone. So under the state and city laws, the response has to be a written response provided to the employer. That can be by email, but it has to be written. But under the county, you can just say these things to the employer over the phone, or you can tell them in person. If you decide you want to respond to a pre-adverse action letter, it's important to provide the employer with evidence of rehabilitation. It's helpful to have this information compiled before applying to jobs because you only get 5 days. So here's some supporting documents that we generally recommend that people gather so that they're ready to respond in that 5-day period. First is a personal statement. The purpose of a personal statement is to reiterate the qualifications that you have and your interest in the job Remind them that you're the person for the job. The personal statement should be in your own voice, and it should briefly explain how you and your life have changed since your conviction. Don't focus very much on the conviction, just acknowledge it and move forward. You should focus on who you are today, the work you've put in to change your circumstances, and why you're the best candidate for the job. Remember, they already offered you the job, so this is really to remind them why they offered you the job in the first place. You can provide evidence of rehabilitation that would minimize the impact of your background check and counteract concerns that the employer may have about past convictions. So if you have any official documents like a pardon or a certificate of rehabilitation, definitely include copies of those in your response. If you have certificates from educational or treatment programs or vocational training, school diplomas, anger management courses, include copies of those certificates in your response as well. And if this applies to you, you can also include certificates for programs that you completed while you were incarcerated. Just back one briefly. We also recommend getting letters of support. So these should be letters from people who know you and can speak to your character from a professional or a personal perspective. You can ask former employers, that's great, volunteer supervisors, friends, family, community members, pastors. And our roadmap to reentry, which is something that John will discuss later, has examples of letters of support and tips for asking people how to write them. And if you have any questions about preparing this kind of packet, you can always reach out to Written Rebound and we can walk you through it. So after you've provided your documents within that 5-day period, the employer has to consider the new information that you provided and do a second individualized assessment. So they're reevaluating whether that conviction still justifies not hiring you. Under the city and the county Fair Chance Ordinances, this second assessment must also be in writing. So again, that's the difference between the state law and the city and county laws, is the requirement that it has to be in writing. If after reviewing your additional information, the employer still decides to withdraw their offer of employment, they have to inform you in writing of that final decision. They also have to tell you of your right to file a complaint with the government about their decision. And so that would be different for state, county, or city, but either way, they need to give you information about how you can file a complaint. For the city and county Fair Chance Ordinances, this second individualized assessment, which is required to be in writing, needs to be provided to you, the same requirements as the first assessment. So for county, it needs to be email and mail. For city, it just needs to be provided. I mentioned that the employer has to give you information about filing a complaint with the relevant government entity. So for state violations, you have 3 years from the date of the violation. So that would be the ultimate job denial, most likely, to file a complaint with the California Civil Rights Department. You also instead can file a lawsuit in civil court. Within 1 year, you would ask the Civil Rights Department to give you a right to sue letter. So you would start with the Civil Rights Department and then just ask them for a right to sue letter. They would close your case and you'd be able to file a lawsuit in civil court. For the county, you only have 1 year from the date of the violation to file a complaint, and you would file that with the Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. And then for the city, also 1 year, and you'd file a complaint with the LA Office of Wage Standards. And I mentioned here that in parentheses, 3 years for state complaints, just because as you can see, there's a lot of overlap. So maybe you miss the county, but for state complaints, you still have that 3 years. You can also pursue, you can also file a complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So that was fair chance hiring information. Now I'm gonna provide some information about background checks, what likely will show up, what can't show up, and what you can do if there are errors. So there are generally 2 different kinds of conviction history information reports. One is a rap sheet. That's a record of all of your arrests and prosecutions in the state of California. And then there's a commercial background check. The vast majority of employers run a commercial background check. So a rap sheet is based on official government records. It lists every encounter that you've had with law enforcement. And it contains criminal history information, as well as any time that you were fingerprinted for a job or for an occupational license. Most public employers, including federal, state, and local government agencies, can see your full rap sheet. Certain private employers can if the job involves access to sensitive information, or if you'll be working with children or the elderly or people with disabilities. State occupational licensing agencies can see your rap sheet, and law enforcement and criminal justice agencies can also generally access your rap sheet. Now, I want to note that they can access your rap sheet. That doesn't necessarily mean that they consider everything that's on it, but that's more to give you a sense of what types of employers can get the full record of arrests and prosecution versus a commercial background check, which is based on an investigation of public records by a private company. It contains limited criminal history information. It, like I mentioned, has that 7-year look back rule, and it can also show open warrants. So it's 7 years from the date of disposition, release, or parole. But for the county, it's 7 years from the conviction, the disposition, which is the conviction. It can also include credit score information or DMV information, other types of information. And it can be seen by many more people. So I give that list for the types of employers that can generally access a rap sheet. A lot more people can see a commercial background check. So public and private landlords can see it, most employers, banks. So it's much more accessible than a rap sheet. In terms of conviction history on a background check, only convictions from the last 7 years should show up. Again, I mentioned that for state consumer reporting laws, that's the date of disposition, release, or parole. And for the county Fair Chance Ordinance, it would have to be from, they can only consider from the date of the conviction. Not everything can show up on a commercial background check. So convictions that are more than 7 years old from that disposition, release, or parole can't show up. Arrests that didn't lead to a conviction cannot show up on a background check unless it's an open case. And convictions that have been expunged or dismissed. In California, we generally say dismissed instead of expunged because it's not a true expungement, because it can still show up on a rap sheet. Or if you've participated in diversion and juvenile cases. Those are all the things that cannot show up on a commercial background check. Unfortunately, errors on background checks do occur. If the background check that the employer provides to you as part of the adverse action has inaccurate information or information that shouldn't have shown up, like a conviction that has been dismissed, your first step is to tell the employer that the background check is incorrect. You do not have to explain to the employer why it's incorrect. And in fact, you probably shouldn't. You should just tell the employer that there's an error, and then you go to the background check company and you have a more direct and specific conversation with them. Once you notify the background check company of the inaccuracy and provide them with proof of the correct information, they have a duty to investigate and correct all of the incorrect information and notify you within 30 days. If the background check company does not correct the inaccuracy after 30 days, you may be able to sue them for the amount of economic damages that resulted from the error, like loss of income for loss of a job, or $10,000, whichever is greater. So that's something to keep in mind if you're having trouble getting something corrected on your background check report. I know that that was a lot of information. Thanks for bearing with me. I'm going to hand it over now to my colleague John to talk about practical tips and lived experience.
Thanks, Amanda. So for this second part of the presentation, we're going to go over and pivot a little bit from the legal perspective that we just heard and kind of think about how does this impact you on your day-to-day. For the first part, generally speaking, for people who have been incarcerated, I wanted to kind of play through some of the ideas that may come to mind. So for folks who were inside, some thoughts may come to you are that I was arrested as a youth, I don't have any job experience, or it's been years since I had an official job per se, especially for people who where all the jobs they had were actually inside prison. And then the big one is who's gonna hire me with a record? I know a lot of people come home and usually want to hit the ground running, but there are some things that kind of come in between that. Things that I like to mention to people, that hopefully this may help you or the people that you work with is what you can do before the application process, before you start actively looking for a job. At the very top, I really like to get the ball rolling on just work documents, things like a birth certificate, social security card, and an ID. Generally, these are documents that most people have, but depending on length of incarceration or if people relied on family members for certain documents, that's not usually, they don't usually have access to those right away. So I recommend getting started on those right away as soon as you come home. Next thing is getting familiar with technology. For long-termers, for people who've done a good chunk of time, who have been in there since, quite maybe sometimes decades, um, I highly recommend that they tackle the issue with technology. It's not going to go away. It's going to keep coming up. Instances of you needing to know how to engage with it will always come up. So some things you can focus on are email, knowing how to attach documents, so like how to send the PDFs over or another document, how to name certain documents, also thinking about the naming convention for your email. Is it proper? Is it professional? Um, Other types of applications that you should probably get familiar with, one, because they're free, two, because they're very commonly used within a workspace, are things like Google Drive, Google Docs, and other applications. If you have some downtime, make sure to research the company ahead of time. This is a big one. You can really get to know who they are. You get to read about their mission, their values, any specific projects that they have. Also, any type of employees that they may have that you really want to work with. This really helps to get you some insight into what the company's doing and how it might be a good fit for you. Big one is read the job description. Well, I know most of us and most people kind of look at what the pay is going to be, which is great, pay and benefits, but also read about how is this job description going to fit to what I'm going to be doing within the organization. Make sure that it's a good fit. Make sure that some of the tasks for the job may not interfere with your record, which Amanda kind of talked about. When it comes to job searching, social media is really cool to kind of get, word on what positions are opening or who's hiring. Indeed and LinkedIn are very common online tools. But don't forget the old school way. I also noticed that a lot of people do end up getting jobs or referrals is through word of mouth. So talk to the people that you know, ask them how did they get into that position, and just ask around and keep your ear out for who's hiring. Next thing is working on your resume. So there's somewhat of a misconception about work that you did while incarcerated, and this also includes volunteer work. But there is a way that you could adapt some of the work that you did while inside. But key things that you have to focus on changing are things like the language that you use within your resume, also certain terms. So you want to change the terminology. You should likely focus on work, education, and volunteering. And this is things like self-help groups, whether you led sports teams, you may have been helping draft bylaws or help run a group while inside. These are all key things and transferable skills that could be used within the workforce. Um, as always, utilize keywords that you see within the job description. Make sure those things match. Um, One thing that's a big thing is focusing on your speller, grammar, and formatting, I recommend having a friend read it, have another friend reread it. A lot of the times, if you don't have a nice and polished cover resume, a lot of the times employers may think, well, if you don't take the time to make sure that this is grammatically correct and you don't have spelling errors, then what makes you think you won't invest that time when doing the job? Um, and one thing I'll mention here, I won't go into depth, but there's also the power of the cover letter. In a lot of instances, a cover letter is not required, but it gives you an opportunity to kind of show who you are as it relates to the job and allows you to say a little bit more about yourself that's outside of the resume. But again, stay focused on employment and the position. All right. So now building your resume. This is where it can get a little tricky. We have two worlds going on. We have on the left-hand side, which is the past version. We have things that people may have done while incarcerated. On the right-hand side, the goal is for us to kind of really think about how we can adapt some of the work inside and make it relatable to some of the work out here. So in the past version, an example is that I worked as a porter in the building. I may have cleaned showers, swept and mopped tiers, wiped down the day room, um, handed out toilet paper, and made sure supplies were in stock. Keywords that people likely won't know out here are things like porter. Another one might be day room. These are things that aren't necessarily relatable, but a way to kind of make that connection is you can reword it to say something like, I manage inventory, maintained a safe work environment, ensured living quarters were sanitized according to health and safety standards. Um, while it's the same work, it's really focused on the actual task at hand, not the setting, but the task and what you did. Another example is I worked in scullery. I wiped down tables in the chow hall and also helped serve trays on the line. Again, most people won't know what scullery is. Other people likely will not know um, what a chow hall is. But the way that you make that relatable is that you can say things like, hey, I have line cook experience with excellent organizational skills, serving 200 plus guests with strict timelines. Again, thinking about what happens inside, chow time's usually about like a 2 hour time window, and you do serve over 200 people within that time frame. Most people like out here likely don't work with such a big population, so that's a skill. Naming convention. How is it that you're naming things? On the left-hand side, we say building porter. Um, it says that I was at Ironwood State Prison in Blythe, California. A way to kind of rework this is to say things like, hey, I'm a custodian. The county, like where the place is located, you could put in the county of, right? You can insert that county. And then for specific city, you can put things like the state of California. Another example is if you ever worked in education while inside as a tutor, you may have been an ABE tutor. Why I particularly helped that was that it was like a local school that was offered through there, but it was Granite Adult School, and this was at California State Prison, Sacramento. If I were to flip this, I will not be doing the exact same thing, but I'm gonna say I'm an adult basic education. Uh, and then I'll also specify what type of tutoring. So I did mainly English. Still list the school. That doesn't change because that still has credit. But then again, you're changing where the city's at. So it's in Represa, California, instead of California State Prison, Sacramento. So the application itself, tips and things to expect. As Amanda mentioned, you don't necessarily have to worry about your record here, but this is a point to start thinking about that. Number one, a tip is to be truthful, but also know your rights. Know what you don't have to disclose. The next part is read questions carefully. Um, don't offer too much information, additional information, if it's not asked at that point, because what you don't want to do is accidentally disclose that you're formerly incarcerated or have a record. Think about your conviction history. How does it relate to the job? Begin to simmer down on some of those questions. Keep track of all application documents. This is things like email, text, If you had a phone call with the employer, you can also make a note right after and say, hey, I spoke, just make a note of the date and time and what you guys talked about. Um, Keep all track of communication between you and the employer. Take screenshots of anything that's asked on the application that might seem weird, especially if it's about your arrest or conviction history. A lot of the times you may think, well, I'll go back to this link and I can download it, or I could take a screenshot then. Sometimes people change that information, or links are broken, or they no longer work. So always take a screenshot if you do come across some weird language. Um, when you're considered as an applicant, a lot of the times they will request a background check. When they do this, you are asked if you want a copy. Always request a copy of the background check. You want to make sure that you're looking at, you have access to the things that they're looking at. Um, and also because there may be errors that you may want to correct. And lastly, if you feel like anything what's been mentioned so far with the Fair Chance Act and also the ordinance, just think about it. If you need to take legal action, if you think that might be an issue, you can reach out to us for support. The interview. Big day has come, what to wear. Think about whether you should show up like in business attire or business, an informal attire. Think about body language as you go in there. A lot of the times it's good practice to bring a copy of your resume with you. One, to show that you're prepared. Two, in case I have any issues finding it, you can show that you're ready. Questions to anticipate. Very common is a question about that says, "Tell me about yourself." For those who are fresh home, this doesn't mean tell them about your life story. It's mainly an opportunity for you to say, "Hey, this is who I am as it relates to this role." So make sure always to stick to the role. Um, how are you best fit for the role? Again, you probably did your research in the back, in the very beginning, where you looked at who the organization is, think about the mission, the values, some of the projects that they have. This is an opportunity for you to begin to include that information. Why do you want to work for this organization? Be truthful. One, it just maybe the organization has a nice impact that you can connect with. Two, maybe it's because it's local. Three, it might be something that's out of your wheelhouse. Tell me a time when you encountered a conflict with working with the team. What was the situation and what did you do to resolve it? This is a very common question, especially if you're going to be working with other team members. I think this is a critical question for people who do have a record, because a lot of the times the perception is that people with a record are just inherently violent, that they will forever be violent, and there's no turning away from that. So I think it's important to really give punctual ideas or examples that show that, hey, when you dealt with a high stressful situation, or some friction, and what did you do to kind of mitigate that? At the end of the day, I know that it might be scary as you're going through this process, but remember that one, you are dependable. You can be trusted. For a lot of people that made it home, you made it home for a reason. A lot of times you didn't simply just scale that out. Number two is also like, you know how to adapt. This isn't your first time. I know that sometimes things out here on the outside could seem a lot scarier, but just think about times when you transfer from one prison to another, hit one yard to another, and starting over. This is kind of similar to that. So you know how to adapt. You can survive in there, you can survive out here. Know that you're an asset, and at the end of the day, you are employable, right? Somebody's missing out by not having you on their team. All right, so we're gonna do some role playing. Um, Although people should follow the law, it's known that people don't always actually do that, and this includes employers. So, what to do if the employer asks about my criminal history during an interview? Again, hopefully they're informed about the Fair Chance Act and also the ordinance. But if they're not, a way to kind of work around this is to kind of slightly give them an idea of what that law is, but also don't do it in a way where like you kind of it puts you in a weird position to kind of discuss that topic. So, an example of how to respond to that is to say, my understanding is that I'm not required to discuss this until after I have received an offer. However, I'd be more than happy to talk about what skills I bring to the position and how I can be a strong asset in your organization. This example here, you quickly tell them, hey, I don't have to talk about this, but what I am happy to talk about are my skills. One other common question is, what if the employer asks about a large gap in my employment history? This is very common for people, one, who had did long stretches of time, two, for people who are choosing not to include their work history while incarcerated. Or three, maybe you just didn't have an opportunity to jump into work, which does happen while in prison. One way to respond to that is to say, during that time, I took time off from pursuing a career because of personal obligations. However, I'm now able to pursue a career and I'm excited about it, right? And focus on like, hey, I can bring these skills to your job. The key thing here is that you're not trying to shy away from your history, but there are laws in place that protect you where you don't have to discuss it at this point. Um, One other thing too is discussing your reason for leaving. So if they look at your resume and they say, "Hey, I saw that you worked as a custodian, right? Like I mentioned previously. Why did you end up leaving that position?" Things you want to avoid are say, "Hey, I went to jail," or "I paroled," or "I switched from one yard to another." Instead, you want to put things like, "Hey, I relocated," or "the contract ended." All right. So now kind of to the more harder part, I would say, and this is speaking about a conviction. Now, generally, as Amanda mentioned, through the application process, you're protected and you don't have to discuss your background up until a conditional offer of employment has been given. At this point, they can choose to run a background check. If they do so, which most employers do, they can begin to dive in, depending on what comes out, dive in and they can begin to dive in to see, hey, what happened? So when speaking about a conviction, first thing is don't wing it. Do not absolutely do that for whatever reason. You want to practice again. You want to take responsibility. And at the end of the day, highlight your change. When talking about your record, you're not on trial again. Remember, for most people, you've been convicted already. Um, this should be in your past. I know by personal experience that even though it should be in my past, it does come up on occasion. But number one thing is to be brief. Use words and terms that the interview can understand. Uh, Very key thing, do not, and I will mention this again, do not get into the details about your case. Again, you're not on trial and just stick to what's on paper. Uh, the key thing that you want to do and you want to pivot is to highlight your strengths. Really pivot that information and say, hey, this is who I am today. And at the end of the day, as I mentioned, practice, practice, and practice. You can't practice too much about this one. And just kind of a quick structural breakdown of the storytelling. Touch on the past, which means take accountability and responsibility for what's on paper. Highlight your transformation. You know, what happened? How did you change this process? How did you become a different person from who you were? And the biggest focus should be on who you are today. So talk about your strengths and who you are as a person as you show up. All right. So after the interview, so how do I speak about my record when asked? At this time, you would have practiced. You would have thought about what it is that you're going to say, what came out on your background check. You should have known that by then. Um, and this isn't a one blanket response. It just gives you an idea of how to approach this conversation because I know that it can be hard. It sounds like it's easy, but a lot of the times, what ends up happening is that you revisit a part of your history that likely made a drastic change into what happened there forward. And so emotions may come up, feelings may come up. So I highly recommend to practice. But a way to kind of navigate this is just one quick structural outline, which is to say, even though I have a past, I have taken responsibility for my actions. I also learn from my mistakes. I can tell you that I'm grateful for a second chance that can contribute many skills and a strong work ethic to your organization because, again, touch on the past. You may want to mention I was convicted of this thing. My transformation or what I did got out of prison or jail or from just being arrested, is I focus on these key things. And then afterwards, you want to focus on those skills. One thing that will help you is if you, Amanda mentioned this in the beginning, but also you want to prepare evidence of rehabilitation ahead of time. This takes time to collect, letters of support from people, things of that nature. So this is stuff that you want to have ready. So things that you can do is like collect certifications, ask people that you know for reference letters. Um, Also, you want to also write up a statement about your convictions. This will really help kind of just staying on topic and really capturing everything that may come up. And then also explaining gaps in employment history. Don't discredit any employment that you did while inside, because even though it's in a prison, you did learn some skills. There are things that are applicable to things out here. Talk confident about it. Again, don't explain too much about the prison setting itself, but focus on the tasks that you did while inside. And also especially education, whether incarcerated, whether through correspondence, or if you're fortunate to have a professor show up to the prison, make sure to mention it. Post interview, what to do after that process. It's always really kind to send a follow-up thank you email. At this point, you also want to continue to keep record of all documents. This could be things like the offer itself, any pre-adverse action letters, a final hiring decision, information about your right to appeal the hiring decision, and any other communication related to your criminal record or just the job itself. Again, Amanda mentioned this, but I'll mention it here again too, is always make sure to ask for a copy of the background check. You want to, again, look for errors, or you want to make sure that the stuff that's on there is supposed to be on there. And again, if you feel like your rights have been violated, you might be able to file a complaint. So we recommend reaching out to Root and Rebound at this point. Next steps. One thing I did want to quickly talk about are some of our resources. So what's available? For people who have been to prison or just have a criminal record or just been to jail, we have our roadmap to reentry. This is more of an encyclopedia, like a legal encyclopedia. It's quite lengthy. You can go on there and you can search key terms, you can search key topics, and what it's going to do is kind of provide you with like a really good roadmap to very specific questions that you may have. Now, the California Reentry Planning Toolkit is a little bit more condensed. The language is a lot more relatable to your everyday speaker. And what it does, it focuses on the moments right before release from prison, to what happens during your reentry. So this is a good toolkit for anybody who has recently been released. And all the topics that we covered around like employment, things like education, getting health insurance, getting your California ID, voting rights, uh, dealing with supervision, whether parole, probation, things of that nature. It covers all these topics. Then we have one toolkit, which is called My Education, My Freedom, which is slightly a little bit outdated, but it does have very helpful information if you're choosing to pursue higher education. And I will pass it off to Philip for some additional resources from the county.
Hello again, everyone. Hello, hello. I am just going to speak on the America's Job Centers that we have. So LA County we have 19 job centers throughout the county. They're called America's Job Centers of California. These are completely free job centers. They offer services like resume building, interview practice, job search assistance, job placements, amongst many other things. This is a really great place to start if you don't know where to start. We have case managers with lived experience. They will guide you through everything you need to know. All you have to do is scan the QR code that's on the screen. You input some basic information and we'll assign you to the AJCC that's closest to you. You can give it a try. I promise you it'll only benefit you. And if you decide not to go anymore, no hard feelings. Within these job centers, we have a invest program. This is a program specifically for people on probation. They provide basic career services, but they also do on-the-job training as well. So it's really good for job experience. For people who aren't on parole but are justice impacted, you have the brand new Renew program as well, which is essentially the same as the Invest program. Finally, if you are interested in actually working for LA County, our department, the Department of Economic Opportunity, we have the PLACE program, which prepares individuals for entry-level LA County jobs by preparing you for the exams that are required for some of these positions. That program has a really high success rate, and it typically ends with receiving a county job. Next slide, please. And as a reminder, so as you see on the first item on the screen, from the Department of Economic Opportunity, if you have any questions about anything related to this presentation, always feel free to email us. The second item that you see on the screen is the contact info for the LA County Department of Consumer and Business Affairs. They are the enforcing agency of the Fair Chance Ordinance, so they can assist you with the complaint, although I highly recommend reaching out to Root and Rebound first. The third item on the screen is the contact info for the LA County Justice Care and Opportunities Department. They help with legal services, transportation, expungement assistance, and many, many other services. They have a hotline that is on the screen, so give them a call and see what they can do for you. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, this slide is going to be outdated actually as of 1 hour, but we had a grant that was for the fire victims, but unfortunately this closed actually today at 5 o'clock, so you can disregard this.
Thank you, Philip. So now survey time, probably the most not so fun part of the presentation, but please, if you have a chance, we would really find it helpful if you fill out this survey. We want to know, one, how was the information presented? You know, what do you think it was helpful? Our presentation style, things like that. You can scan the QR code. Also, this survey will be sent out to you. In addition to some of the materials that we discussed today that we use, so the presentation itself and also a recording of this presentation. So if you have the free time now, right now would really be helpful. And I'm gonna drop that in the chat just so that everybody has access to that. All right. And now we're going to jump into our Q&A part. I know that folks had access to the Q&A throughout the presentation. Most of your questions should have been answered. But this portion is, we're going to allow anybody to kind of speak about questions that they may have. I ask that you try to keep the questions more general and not necessarily specific to your situation. So if you do end up talking about a very particular situation, where only kind of refers to you, we would likely follow up with you. That way we can discuss that issue. But this is an opportunity for more general questions that you may have. All right, and we'll open up the floor for a few minutes. All right, any questions? I'll give it about a minute. Make sure if anybody does have a question, they have an opportunity to ask it.
Zuri has their hand raised. I can unmute Zuri, and then we also got a Carol.
I've already answered that question, the first one.
Okay, got it. Carol, let me go ahead and allow to talk. Okay, Carol, go ahead.
Hello. So I'm going to school for my master's for social work, and I want to know if the certificate of rehabilitation is going to help me. I've expunged I've expunged my state records, but I also have a federal one.
Can't hurt. A certificate of rehabilitation is helpful if you can't get the conviction dismissed, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I will also add that I'm not familiar with the consequences of federal convictions because those generally are not expungible. So for a state conviction, a certificate of rehabilitation overcomes that conviction in the same way that a dismissal would. I'm not entirely sure the effect for a federal conviction, but again, a certificate of rehabilitation can only help.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? All right. Well, you'll have our contact information. We'll make sure to follow up with everybody that attended this presentation. Again, you will receive a link to the survey. Please fill that out. You're also going to receive a copy of this presentation itself and a recording of the presentation. If any questions do come up, then you'll have our contact info so that you can reach out to us. But other than that, I do want to thank everybody for taking time out of your evening to show up. We hope that this presentation was helpful, that you can maybe either personally benefit from, or you can share with some colleagues, friends, or family members that you think could help them on their road to navigate employment while living with the record. With that, just want to say thank you to our partners, and we hope everyone has a good night. Thank you.